Welcome back. This is the fifth section titled Deploying a Database. In the last two sections, we learned the basics of how to deploy our Laravel application. One of Laravel's strongest pros is how easy it is to build a database-driven application. So it's only fitting that we devote a little time to learning how to deploy a database. Now, deploying a database in itself is a whole video course. We don't have time to cover everything, so instead we're going to cover the basics, overarching introduction to deploying a database that will help us get started. We're going to learn about database environments, how to actually deploy a database from your development environment to production, and some techniques on keeping our environments in sync with each other. So let's begin. So this is the first video titled Database Environments of Section 5. In this video, we're going to learn about the different database environments, and when and why you might need to use them. Then, finally, we'll look at some of the pros and cons. It is a common practice to have a production environment and a local or development environment for our Laravel application. The local or development environment is where we do all of our work. And once our application is at a good spot, we deploy it to our production environment where other people can then access our application. Depending on the needs of our application, we may see fit to have other environments, like an alpha or beta, or we can just have as many testing environments as we need. There's nothing really new about this. We've touched on some of these concepts in earlier videos, and we'll try to dive a little deeper later in this course. Database environments are essentially the same concept. The biggest problem I face with using databases in my Laravel application is that my production site has all of the data that my users are using. Now, there are ways you can connect directly to your production database. Here is an example of an API that you could create. APIs can basically work like a communication tool between your application and your database. But neither of these methods are really a good idea to develop off of. A very simple change to your database can kill your application on production. You personally may not be affected by the bug you introduced, but your users will most likely be affected by it. Good practice and a solution to this problem is to have a database for each of your staging environments. By doing this, you've separated the users from any development you're doing, which is great because as long as your application is working when you deploy, they shouldn't see any major bugs. But this sadly only introduces another problem. While your users may be constantly updating your database, your local development and testing environments are quickly becoming outdated. This may not be a huge problem depending on the type of data you're storing, but I personally like to work with the freshest set of data available. It also makes fixing bugs easier, and it makes it easier to see exactly what the user is seeing and design or develop to their needs. A solution to all of this may be a hybrid of the two options we just talked about. We may have a database for each staging environment, but we could potentially write a small script or task that syncs all of our staging databases with our production database. This keeps our data current, and it allows us to separate development from production. We'll talk about this later in this section.